All right. Good evening, and you are welcome to class. Class. Okay. 110. Hold on. Let me confirm my screen is now showing. All right. Screen is showing now, and the course is on philosophy of primary education. Of course, we have been, looking at the course gradually from looking at the concept of education to looking at what philosophy is, and then the application of philosophy in different fields. Today, our concern is philosophy and education. We have done justice to look at philosophy on its own as a concept. We have also looked at education on its own as a concept. Now, this evening, we want to merge the two together by, connecting the two major words that makes up the title of this course. PED 110, Philosophy of Primary Education. So, we are combining philosophy with education today. You know, I've always said this since we learned the idea of philosophy in this course, you find out that the way we have been taking our classes have shifted a bit. We now criticize, philosophize on every course material we find ourselves reading. We are not just reading for reading sake to finish. We are now interested in explaining the concept to ourselves. So, by the end of this class, you should understand how philosophy relates to education, the relationship that exists between the two. And also, you should be able to note the different ways scholars conceive or approach philosophy of education. Um, so, as a form of introduction to the unit, uh, you know, in our previous unit, we discussed important ideas such as the meaning of philosophy of education, philosophical inquiry, functions of philosophy, then the implications of philosophy for education. Now, in this unit, our concern is the relationship between philosophy and education, the relationship between philosophy and education, and in what different ways can philosophy of education be understood or approached? Those are the two things we want to figure out in this unit. That second concern, which says, in what different ways can philosophy of education be understood or approached? It gives us the different conceptions or approaches to philosophy of education. Now to the core objectives, the main objectives we have here, we have that at the end of this lesson, you as someone or an attendee of this class, you should be able to, one, explain the relationship. Today you are studying relationship between two figures, between two things. One, philosophy, let's call it the man, then education, the woman. So we want to study how they relate and how they do things together. The second thing is we want to discuss the different conceptions of philosophy of education. And lastly, you must be able to describe the major philosophical approaches to education. Now, we have done justice to our objectives for this class. The next thing is to go to the main content, and I will first read what is here to us, so we get the picture first before we start explanation. Now, you should know that the philosophical orientation apparent in the idea of making men critical is to make the teacher or the educator to be self-critical. This is to illustrate the passion for certainty, which is perhaps innate in all humans. This fact brings philosophy into close relationship with education, which seeks to impart knowledge through an acceptable manner to the people. excuse me, the critical attitude developed as a result enhances human knowledge and creates an avenue for the building of principles of relational beliefs. It creates open-mindedness in educational practices by practitioners like teachers and educators who allows their belief decision to be subjected to further study and examination. Now, philosophers look at theories, assumption, postulation, statements, and value judgment critically as to justify them. Now, the logicalities and consistency of any claim in education in the process become clarified. Philosophy equips the teacher to deal with educational problems by obtaining self-reflection, criticism, and analysis. He reasons and assesses critically the validity of principles. According to Dewey in 1966, he describes the relationship as very close, and he remarks that philosophy of education is not an external application of ready-made ideas to a system of practice having a radically different origin and purpose. It is only an explicit formation of right mental and moral habit in aspect to the difficulties of temporary social life. The most penetrating definition of philosophy which can be given is then that that means the philosophy is a theory of education in its most general phases. Okay, don't worry. Let's continue reading. We will definitely explain things to it ourselves. Let's just keep reading for now. Now, Nweke in 1995 on page 25 was of the view that philosophy gives education the thought and education gives it an outlet in practice. This means that philosophy and education are complementary disciplines to each other and they are mutually reconstructive. They are not only a process but also a product in terms of the child's maturation, moral and intellectual development. Bros and Browner in 1976 maintained that philosophical activities serve pedagogical purposes as analytic, uh, evaluative, speculative, and integrative process. Finally, philosophy and education work for the harmonization of education policies, theories, and practices, evaluation of possibilities in educational practices, and benefits to the recipient. And on the final note in this paragraph or in this part, philosophy and education have a common mode of thought and action is thinking and acting strategies in educational context. Hmm. So this is a very long reading, and I believe we have seen what the material has to say in this our consign today. I believe we have the two of you here now. Good evening. Kindly drop something in the chat box so I know you are here because we have to test ourselves. Now let's go. I hope I won't exceed our 45 minutes today. Belong with taking some of these courses, so it's very important we really dwell a lot to meet up the time we've missed. Now, relationship between philosophy and education. You understand something very simple idea. This very simple idea, you need to understand this, that philosophy asks what education should achieve and why. Let me say it again. Philosophy asks what education should achieve and why, while education puts those ideas into practice. We are trying, before we even start going into deep explanation of what the material is trying to give us, the picture it's trying to create, you have to understand this statement. I've dropped it in the chat box. Philosophy asks what education should achieve and why it should achieve it, while education puts those ideas into practice. That is what the relationship looks like. But let's talk more on it. Let's take, for example, let's assume that we have a society of people that believes that every child deserves equal opportunity. The statement is based on, a value or a philosophy. Education then asks, that statement is based on philosophy, on the philosophy that every child deserves equal opportunity. It's based on value or philosophy. But education will ask, how do we make equal opportunity possible? You see the two things now. We have a society of people that believe that every child deserves equal opportunity. That is a philosophy. You know, every one of us have a philosophy to life. There's so many things you do that are naturally as a result of your philosophy, the way you view life. You understand? So if that is the philosophy of that community, when education steps in, education will ask some questions by saying, how do we make, because education is in the process of making, in the process of producing. Philosophy seems to give the brain work, the thinking process. They think, they come up with ideas. Education practices the idea. So education will ask, how do we make equal opportunity possible? That is when the government may come in by establishing public schools, introducing compulsory basic education, maybe providing scholarships, training teachers, providing learning materials. So philosophy provides the idea, while education provides the practical means of implementing the idea. So that is the basic relationship that we can, draw out of the explanation in the material. Philosophy is the giver of the idea. Education will draw out plans, practical means of implementing those ideas that philosophy gives. Now let's take a very simple illustration. Let's imagine you want to build a house. Let's say Madam Titi wants to build a house now, maybe a scraper, or probably a duplex or anything. Now, before construction begins, somebody must decide, what type of house do we want? Like, Madam Titi will need to sit down. What kind of house do I want to build? That's the first thing. She may even ask herself, why am I building? Like, what kind of house am I building? Why am I building? She may ask, who will live there? You understand? And then she may even go further by saying, how many rooms do I want in this house? Or should the building have? How many rooms should it have? What standards should guide the construction? Maybe you want a very high standard, want the house to be solid and be able to live for like 100 years. So you have the standard. So you ask those questions. You ask yourself, or maybe your engineers ask you those questions so that they will know how to go about the construction. Now, that thinking stage is what we call philosophy. It's similar to the work of philosophy. You are thinking. Your thinking is betting ideas that serves like a foundation or a kind of plan for what you're about to do. Now, the actual building of the house is similar to education. So when the process of building starts and they start digging the foundation, blah, 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 education is likened to that. Well, but when you were deliberating, how much will I expend on this project? What kind of house do I want? How do I want it to be? How big do I want it? How many rooms do I want in it? What standard should I use to build it? When you are doing that, you are philosophizing. That's philosophy. But once they start implementing what you've thought in your brain as ideas and you brought out as ideas, when the rebuilding, the building, the construction, when it commences, that is education. So that is the relationship between the two. So therefore, we say that philosophy gives direction, education carries out the direction. That's another thing you should note. That's what grabbing from that concept. Philosophy gives the direction, education carries out the direction. I don't know if people are here. I want to ask some questions in the chat box, but I just feel like I'm the only one here. So I have something to. I am merely explaining what we've read. We've done the reading, so I don't think it should be. So I have an icebreaker there. You guys can try to attempt it. But while you are doing that, let's go to one of the important things we can pick out here that says that philosophy, there's something important here that talks about philosophy, you know, develops critical thinking. If you check that paragraph very well, you see that it's very clear there that philosophy develops critical thinking. One major relationship between philosophy and education is that philosophy teaches both the teacher and the learner to be critical in their thinking. And what do you mean by critical? It simply means, criticizing people. When you say a critic, they can criticize a lot. Sorry, it doesn't mean that you should be criticizing people. Rather, sorry. When you make critical, when somebody is critical, that is, if you are thinking it merely means criticizing people. That is wrong. That seems to be a very general view of it. It means examining. When you are critical, you are examining an idea carefully before you accept it or reject it. That is the meaning of being a critical person. So a critical person is different from a critic anyway. But you being critical means you are good in examining. If somebody just tell you something now, you don't just accept it. Let's take for example, uh, if someone says children should never be punished in school, let's just assume someone says that. A philosophical teacher will not immediately say that is correct, or you are wrong, I don't accept it. A philosophical teacher will not just go straight into that. You won't just quickly accept or reject ideas without critically examining those ideas. Instead of that, that philosophical teacher will do the following. When he hears that children should never be punished, he will not say, that is correct, or that is wrong. What he will do is he will ask questions. What do we mean by punishment in this your statement? Are all forms of punishment harmful? What is the purpose of punishment? Does punishment improve behavior? Are there better alternatives to punishment? What right does the child have? You can see that the philosophical teacher did not just accept or reject the idea, but was ready to dig deep into what is going on in the mind of the person saying that statement. If you ask those kind of questions, you are, the thing is very deep. It's very deep. It's not just somebody just tell you something and you quickly accept or you quickly reject. No, 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 that's not it. Now, philosophy makes the teacher self-critical. That is the second point that was, raised here. It makes the teacher self-critical. Philosophy makes the teacher self-critical. Let me just highlight a bit so that you know where I'm going to. So philosophy makes the teacher self-critical. What does that mean? From our material here, we can deduce that philosophy does not only make us critical of other people's idea, it makes the teacher self-critical. What does that mean? The teacher should also question his or her own beliefs. A teacher should also question his or her own beliefs. For example, if a teacher believes that any child who fails mathematics is lazy, that is your own philosophy. But philosophy encourages the teacher to ask, is that true? Is that always true? Is it every child that doesn't know mathematics that is lazy? The teacher may even ask, could the teaching method be the problem? Does the learner have a learning difficulty? Or was it insufficient time that we have for teaching mathematics? Or is the classroom environment not appropriate for learning mathematics? Maybe ask that, or maybe students don't understand the language of instruction that I am using. Now, that is an open-minded teacher, and that is a self-critical teacher. That is the level you must attain if you will do well as a philosophical teacher. You question your own philosophies, your own beliefs. You don't just, we've done something before in one of those courses when they were using the mono, is it mono mode or mono whatever method of teaching. When the teacher, it was the island of knowledge, nobody questions the teacher, no student dare raise a question or anything. No, that's not the case now. You yourself, you should, and if you meet this kind of teachers, they used to be very, very intelligent, because when something happens, they question what is happening. Is it my is it why did all of I gave them a classwork in mathematics and more than 70% failed. Was it the teaching method I was using that they don't understand, or did they have difficulties, or is it that our classroom is not? Are there noise or any? No, you question yourself. You are critical. You question yourself. That is self-critical teacher. Now, another thing is from the points mentioned there about philosophy, which they try to tell us that philosophy promotes open-mindedness. Philosophy promotes open-mindedness. You are in the class and you are not answering the question. I don't even know if it's my student that are in the class or just some random people watching. So philosophy promotes open-mindedness. And what does this mean? As a philosophical person, or a philosophical attitude means that a person is willing to allow his beliefs and decisions to be subjected to further examination or criticism or even evidence or correction. So you don't just believe that anything you know is just the final. Nobody, any other idea, no. Any other idea doesn't fit into you. What you know, what you believe is the main thing. No. A philosophical teacher is not like that. Let's assume that a school has always used this rule that students must copy notes silently for the whole period. Now, a teacher with an open mind may ask the management of the school, is this still the best method of teaching? If that is the philosophy of the school, that students must copy notes silently for the whole period, then an open-minded teacher, because we say philosophy, promotes open-mindedness. You are ready to learn. You are ready to be subjected to further explanation. Anything you believe, you are ready to take correction from them when somebody else view them differently. Now, the teacher may discover that group discussion, demonstration, maybe problem solving like we've done before, technology, or even practical activities could produce better learning results than just saying students should copy notes silently for the whole period. No. So philosophy prevents education from becoming, this is how we have always done it, so we must continue doing it like that. No. Philosophy prevents that from happening in education because it gives room for open-mindedness. We must be open-minded, ready for further examination, corrections, criticism, and so on. Now, the fourth thing we can bring out of this paragraph is that they said that the teacher, or sorry, if philosophy examines educational claims. What are the claims already in motion in education? Philosophy examines them. No, it critically examines theories that are, like we say, if you have the law of motion, the law of this thing, the law of that, the theory of so and so, the theory of so and so. Philosophy examines theories, assumptions, statements, postulations, value judgment, and so on. So the purpose is to determine whether such claims are logical, whether they are consistent over time, whether they are reasonable, and if they are justifiable. In science, if something is not justifiable, it's not worth believing. Let's take an example of what I'm saying when we say that philosophy examines educational claims. Assuming someone says that private schools always provide better education than public schools. You in Nigeria, you naturally want to believe that without questioning it. Let's assume someone says that. A philosopher will ask, What is meant by better education? Or what do you mean by better examination result? Better facilities? Better teachers? Do you mean better discipline? Or is the statement true of every private school? So, philosophy helps us avoid careless generalizations. Somebody that is not philosophical in thinking will accept all generalizations as true, and that is someone that lacks critical thinking. The fifth thing this paragraph is trying to tell us about philosophy and education is the relationship between them is that philosophy helps the teacher solve educational problems. Now, philosophy equips the teacher with three important abilities from this place. Uh, it's written here clearly. So we have right here that, okay, I'm trying to bring them out from the material, just like we finished reading. So, one is reflection, criticism, and analysis. Those three things are what philosophy brings out in a teacher, or it helps the teacher to become. It equips the teacher with three important abilities: ability to reflect, ability to criticize, and ability to analyze. So, reflection, criticism, and analysis. Now, what do we mean by reflection? You think deeply about an issue. If you have not gotten to that level as a teacher, I don't know what you'll be giving to your children, your learners. So, you think deeply about an issue. That is reflection. What of criticism? You examine whether the idea is reasonable or not. That is what we mean by the skill of criticism. Now, for analysis, you break down or you break the issue into parts so that it can be properly understood. You must know how to analyze as a teacher. It's very important. Now, let's assume that pupils are performing poorly in your class. Instead of you just saying that these students are not serious, Jare, they are not serious. I'm trying my best. If you are a teacher that have been through study of philosophy and you know that you are meant to be a reflective, a critical teacher and an analyzing teacher, the teacher will try to examine the following. Instead of just saying those children are not serious, you could just say the teacher will examine things like, is the curriculum the problem? You know, we are burning children that are now called Gen Z. Maybe the curriculum is no longer working. Is the curriculum the problem? Or is the teaching method the problem? Or is the classroom size not okay? Or the learning materials we are using, are they outdated for the trend that is ongoing now? Or probably maybe their home, their family issues are affecting them. The attendance, is it okay? Assessment method we are using, or the test where the questions we are asking them is too high for their level. You know, you reflect on everything reflectable. That is you applying philosophical thinking to education. You will soon see that the relationship between them is almost inseparable because one helps the other to achieve its aim. So, John Dewey on philosophy and education strongly emphasized the relationship between philosophy and education as philosophy should not simply be a collection of ideas brought from outside and forced upon education. Rather, philosophy should grow out of the real problems of human and social life. That is what John Dewey says. Philosophy should not simply be a collection of ideas brought from outside and forced upon education. Philosophy should grow out of the real problems of human and social life. Now, his philosophy is famously described as the theory of education in its most general phases. The theory of education in its most general phases. This is where what I am talking about. His theory, no, has been described or popularly known as the theory of education in the most general phase. So if you are asked in the exam whose theory was described or is described as the theory of education in the most general phases, you are talking of John Dewey. And what does that his theory means? It means that philosophy provides the broad theoretical foundation upon which education operates. For example, if your philosophy says children learn best through experience, then your education system should encourage practical work, experiments, projects like excursions, problem solving activities, and active participation so that your educational practice should reflect your philosophical beliefs. Now we have Inweke's view in 1995. According to Inweke's view, now I am here now trying to talk about this person, this Inweke's. Now, according to Inweke's view, philosophy gives education the thought, and education gives it an outlet in practice. This is one of the easiest ways to remember the relationship. Philosophy is the thought, education is the practice. Philosophy, the thought, education, the practice. Now, let us use a Nigerian example for this thing we are trying to say. If we have a national philosophy in Nigeria that Nigeria wants citizens who are united, responsible, and self-reliant. If you remember from the national policies and philosophy that we read about before, that is just thought. We're just thinking in our mind that Nigeria wants citizens who are united, responsible, and self-reliant. Well, we are just thinking. That is just thought. Education then introduces civic education, social studies, vocational education, entrepreneurship, maybe national values, citizenship education, and also so on and so forth. So we have practice. The thought was a philosophy that Nigeria wants citizens who are united, responsible, and self-reliant, while the education aspect, which is the practice, introduces things that will be like vehicle that will bring to pass that our thought. Therefore, philosophy decides what should be achieved. Education provides the means of achieving it. It's very simple. The relationship between the two of them, very simple. Now, what are we trying to do? This helps you as a teacher, to be the best you can when you understand how philosophy impacts education, the relationship that exists between the two of them. So philosophy and education are complementary. That's another thing we've learned from the place we read. Now, they are complementary disciplines. What does that mean? Complementary in that context means that they support and complete each other. So one cannot function effectively without the other. Now think of them like, let's say we say compass and journey. You know, philosophy is the compass, education is the journey. Without a compass, you may travel without knowing where you are going to. But without traveling, the compass alone will not take you anywhere. You see the relationship. So philosophy is the compass, education is the journey. So without a compass, you may travel without knowing where you are going to, no destination or wrong destination. However, without traveling also, the compass will remain idle. It will take you can't stay on compass and it will transport you to anywhere. No. Now, philosophy and education are mutually reconstructive. That is another thing we can see from this Inweke's view of the whole concept. Says they are mutually reconstructive. They are mutually reconstructive. Now, what does this mean? No, philosophy influences education, and experiences in education can also influence philosophy. For example, let's say a society initially believes that, let's say before, a society believed that teaching should mainly involve the teacher talking while learners listen. Maybe after some educational research and experience, they got to realize that learners understand better through active participation. So the society may modify their educational philosophy. So philosophy changes education, while educational experience can also reshape philosophy. So they enter into each other. That is what we mean by mutually reconstructive. Philosophy and education are mutually reconstructive. Now let's go to Bruce and Bronner's view. Bruce and Bronner's view. What's their own view of education? And I think that's the last thing we'll be doing on that part. Now, Bruce and Bonner, no, the Browner explained that philosophical activities serve educational or pedagogical purposes through the following: analytic process, evaluative process, speculative process, integrative process. Let's try to explain each of the processes that Bruce and Bronner, stated as one way philosophy impart education. What does it mean by analytic process? Analytical process means, or to be analytical means breaking educational ideas into parts to understand them. That is the analytical work of philosophy. So that is the analytical work of philosophy. It means it breaks down educational concept into understandable, you know, units. For example, in analytical process, philosophy may tend to ask, what exactly do we mean by quality education? If you ask that kind of question, you are trying to analyze what this person is trying to say about quality education. Now, it also said that according to Bros and Bronner, they also said it is an evaluative process. Now, what does it mean to be evaluative? It judges rather. So judging whether something is good or bad, whether it is desirable or undesirable, that is evaluative. So an example is, if you say, is corporal punishment educationally acceptable? You are trying to judge, you are evaluating. Another thing mentioned there is speculative process. What does that one mean? Now, what does that mean when you say speculative? That is, it makes thinking about possibilities and what education ought to become. When you say you are speculating on something now, you are thinking about possibilities and what education ought to become. That's another work of philosophy. So if I say that, what kind of education will Nigerian children need 20 years from now? So that is you speculating that in the next 20 years, what is likely going to be the fate of Nigerian children education. Now, bringing different ideas together. Bringing different ideas together. Example, combining. So when we say integrative, when we say it is integrative, we're trying to say that it brings different ideas together. So philosophy brings different ideas together, like combining psychology with sociology, like technology and ethics, like teaching methods and so on and so forth. That is the work of uh, philosophy. Now, other areas of relationship between philosophy and education, other areas of relationship between philosophy and education. I hope I still have time. I don't want to exceed your time today. Yes, good evening, Madam Titi. Okay, so philosophy and education also work together by formulating educational policies, developing educational theories, improving educational practices, developing the child, and then harmonizing educational policies as listed in the last part here. So I think we have done justice to that. Now, if they ask you to list the four relationships between philosophy and education, you can quickly write COPS. And what do we mean by COPS? We mean by the C stands for critical thinking, the O stands for open-mindedness, the P stands for theory formulation, policy or theory formulation, and the S stands for solution of educational problems. That is the easiest way to put this thing in your mind. COPS. C, critical thinking. O, open-mindedness. P, policy or theory formulation. And then the S is solution of educational problems. And the things you should remember is that philosophy provides educational direction, while education puts philosophical ideas into practice. Philosophy evaluates educational theories, while both philosophy and education promote intellectual and moral development. So, we have some exercise here, but I've talked at length on this. I don't think we should waste time on that anymore. We have 3 minutes to the end of the class. I think I will just use these 3 minutes if probably we have any question from your side here. It's as if Madam Titi joined late. I don't know, but I can feel that. So, do we have any question coming from your side? Anything you want to say or any contribution? We're actually ending the class now. If you come late, you can try to watch it. As soon as I end the class, the recording is there already. The same link. You try to watch it. So, if we don't have any question, we have done justice today to what we call the relationship between philosophy and education. That was the main idea. The relationship between philosophy and education. I say if you consider philosophy as a man and education as a woman, and the two of them want to marry each other to produce, a future together, then what type of relationship will exist between them? That was all you studied today, and we have done justice to that. I believe, one of the relationship is critical thinking that philosophy develops, self-critical teachers it produces, open-mindedness it causes in teachers. It also, examines educational claims, that is evaluation. It's philosophy helps education to solve problems. And we'll talk about some men like John Dewey and Bruce and Bronner. We just looked at their philosophy for education briefly, and that is that on the relationship between education and philosophy. So in our next class, we'll continue from 3.2, conceptions of philosophy of education. Conceptions of philosophy of education. That is where we'll continue in our next class. So see you in the next class. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. We have just 104 tonight. Try to attend the class. Thank you.